Well, anyone that's been listening for a while knows I get really geeked out when we have an opportunity to speak with filmmakers. So today I'm beside myself speaking with Reuben Hamlyn, one of the directors of Another Body, documentary that came out in 2023. We'll spend a lot of time getting into it and kind of talking about it, as well as his career. But just at the top, Reuben, thank you so much for making time for this.
Oh no, thank you so much for inviting me. I'd love to go on and on about this film and film in general. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy. I kind of found out about you individually. I knew about the film, but I found out about you through, Kyle over at Utopia, because I think they released this on disc here in the last few months. We're recording this in June. Should release in June as well. And the disc has been out for a few months now. Um, but I got to see it, and it's just what an amazing documentary. Do you for anybody that doesn't know it, I want to get into what the story's about. But do you remember there's a documentary that came out, I'm trying to find the exact year, 2010, which is called Catfish. Have you ever seen that by chance? The
Yeah,
original documentary?
yeah. I've seen the original one. I haven't seen all of the spin-off, the endless spin-off of Catfish, but I've seen the original documentary. Yeah.
The Catfish cinematic universe. But I remember when that film came out, I had one of these moments of like this I maybe some rough concept of this activity going on, but it never had it kind of, really tightly confined to a documentary, seeing one person's life who was impacted by this idea. And I haven't really felt that way until I saw Another Body. It's not exactly the same topic, but it's a similar idea of kind of how deepfake is being used to create pornography, non-consensual pornography, using random women's images and putting them on anybody's bodies, and essentially how damaging that is. It's kind of told this grand story told through the lens of one or two women that are dealing with the fallouts from this. And it's another one of these moments where I just, I feel like you are bringing light and you're bringing attention to something that it will probably be in the public discussion for years at this point.
Yeah, I mean, even since the film's come out, the attention that sort of the to deepfake as a subject uh has grown significantly. And it's just going to get worse as these tools become easier to use
Hmm.
and more sophisticated, so that completely seamless with only like a few images. As the problem grows, we are going to see more women who find themselves targeted by this technology. And so we like the noise, though. The noise kind of helps us with our goals to sort of change the laws and make sure there are protections for women who find themselves in this awful situation, and to really, apply pressure to the tech companies which are enabling this sort of culture and actually industry of deepfake abuse to grow.
Yeah.
So we love the noise. We hate the growth of the technology. Yeah. Yeah.
But there are certain things that technology enables that are good. I mean, I work in the tech industry, but there is always a dark side to it, and it's crazy how they kind of grow at the same time. A lot of times, it's difficult to separate them. But the discussion around this will be good because that's one of the shocking things in the film for me, is that the two women that you sort of highlight. Oh, it's primarily one, but there's quite a bit of time on her friend as well. I, it's just there's just no legal recourse for them as they find images of themselves online and videos of themselves online. It's crazy to me that the police are basically like, well, we tried. There's nothing else we can do.
Yeah, yeah. And slowly, I mean, there are a couple of laws in a number of states in the US and in a few countries around the world, but for the majority of women who find themselves in this situation, you're right, there is absolutely no legal recourse. And without that, police are really unmotivated to do anything. They just
Sure.
tell these women that, like, the guy did nothing wrong, so we don't have to do anything. Um, there are roundabout ways of maybe building a case against someone for other reasons, like, defamation or
Mm-mm.
impersonation. But you have to sort of collect the evidence yourself or pay someone to sort of collect that evidence. And even then, there's no guarantee that the case will be successful. And so for most women who this happens to, they just find themselves being sort of told by the police to suck it up and move on with their lives. They never know who it is who made these images and videos. There's this constant threat, of someone who's quite clearly out there trying to harm them, but who's hiding behind this veil of anonymity. And it can be very, very frightening. It can really upturn a life, socially, professionally,
Yeah.
psychologically. And so it's a bad situation to be in. And really, we need something to change to sort of, help these women or to try and prevent more women in the future having this happen to them. Yeah.
There's three or four things you brought up in that I want to come back to as we talk, but maybe this is a good time just to take a step back and say, your career has been very quickly rising. You had two shorts, and then now you had this opportunity to have a documentary that you made that's been playing in certain, festivals, got picked up through film distribution, physical media distribution. How did you come across this story? Like, how did you kind of get involved with this project to begin with?
Yeah, it has, quite like early origins. I was studying like undergrad at King's College London, and I did this like very ridiculous, very undergrad sort of paper on the sort of semiotics of 4chan, like a Derridean analysis of the
Okay.
semiotics of 4chan. And I was mostly looking into the sort of the like alt-right communities on 4chan, but there's a lot of crossover between the different boards. And it was around then, it was actually just after then that I first encountered deepfake pornography. I was following a lot of like Twitter accounts which were kind of tracking 4chan activity. One of them posted about deepfake technology towards the end of 2017, I
Okay.
believe. And what a lot of people don't know, and actually what isn't contained in the documentary, we kind of sadly had to cut it because I do think it's a really interesting sort of fact, is that deepfake technology was purpose made to insert women's faces into pornography without their consent. The first deepfake that appeared was of Gal Gadot. It appeared on Reddit in 2017 and was quickly adopted by the 4chan community. There's a lot of like crossover there as well.
Hmm.
And so this wasn't a technology which was sort of made for good or made for anything neutral. It was intentionally made to harm women. And immediately sort of birthed into the hands of these like terrible people on 4chan. Not everyone on 4chan is bad. There just are a lot of bad people on 4chan.
Right.
And so yeah, and so when I sort of saw that, I was like, this is going to be a disaster. We've seen how these groups of men vilely misogynistic, do whatever they can to harass women that they have some grudge against. And now
Right.
we've given them this incredibly powerful technology. Um, but at first I was like, this is not my story to tell. And so I kind of left it for a bit. And 6 months down the line, I see the first news coverage of deepfake technology, and it's talking about this, how deep fake technology is going to be a threat to elections and geopolitical stability.
Mm,
There's not like
mm,
one mention of the fact that this technology was, made to harm women and was actually being used to harm women. Everything was sort of speculative and really ignored the issue at hand. And so I got in contact with Sophie, who's the co-director, Sophie Compton. She's an old friend of mine, and she just done an amazing play on image-based sexual abuse. And I asked her if she was interested. She never made a documentary before. She never made a film before. I was like,
mm,
"Oh,
mm.
are you interested in making a documentary?" There's this really fascinating sort of subject matter here. No one's paying attention to it, and that we have an unfolding disaster. We should sort of do something about it. And she agreed, and slowly this sort of project developed and grew into the feature that took 5 years to make. I mean, I will tell you, originally it was going to be a short film. We sort of had the idea in June and thought it was going to be done by December as a short
Okay.
film. And that was in 2018, around 2018. Uh,
Wow.
and yeah, the film, yeah, and I'm still, I'm doing this podcast now, 6 years.
Some short film you made.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. So, was there, how did you land on, again, I know there's a lot of stuff in the film how it's very important to protect the identity of those involved for a lot of obvious reasons, right? But how did you choose one subject, or in this case, one subject kind of led to two or three that popped up and actually interviewed, but there was a main one, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we didn't really have the luxury of having multiple options for subjects. Normally in documentary, you will get like 10 potential subjects and kind of go through a casting process, find, who is the person which most sort of distills what we're trying to say in this
Okay.
in this film? What are the sort of themes we're trying to explore, or who has the most sort of engaging story? In the case of our situation, we, scouring these pages on 4chan, trying to sort of find stories, and we did encounter a number of different women. Um, but for the most part, it was hard to sort of track them down. We emailed one person who was very belligerent towards us, like fair enough. With Taylor, we were actually really lucky to find her because we didn't find her, in most of these cases, the sort of the deepfakes that were being posted were labeled as deepfakes. Otherwise, they're incredibly difficult to find. We're going on these 4chan pages
Mm,
which are dedicated to sort of deepfakes. And so we knew that, but that what they were. But with Taylor, we first found her Pornhub and X Hamster, where this her perpetrator was purporting to be her,
hmm
and claiming these videos were real to try and solicit men to come and find her. And so we really stumbled across this because and the way that we did that was we'd used reverse image search software to search a screenshot of a deepfake we found on 4chan, kind of with the purpose of finding out that if you discovered a deepfake of you was on 4chan, how would you go about sort of locating
mm-hmm.
where else on the internet this video had appeared? Because that's what happens on the internet, particularly with pornography. I
Sure.
should intimate imagery in the case of non-consensual pornography. But is it appears in one place and then just cascades out, just popping up everywhere. And so we did that as a test, and that deepfake screenshot that we searched pulled up Taylor's Pornhub and Xhamster pages because it was using the same sort of like background video. And we could immediately identify it as a deepfake because we'd been so immersed in deepfakes for so long during our research phase.
Okay.
All of Taylor's personal information was there, and so we reached out to her, and boy, do I feel lucky because not just was she really receptive to the idea of being in the film once we sort of explained what we wanted to do with the film and that her identity would be sort of protected. But she's also great. She's just like so articulate and she's so
Yeah.
endearing. She's like a charming person to watch on screen. And particularly given the sort of the nature of the film, it's not a verite documentary where we get to sort of use a camera to sort of film details to keep it engaging. It for most of the time, you're like looking at her face, well, not
Right.
exactly her face, but you're looking at Taylor's face.
Right.
And so I feel so fortunate that she was the person we came across and she sort of agreed to do it because yeah, she was perfect. She was perfect for the film. Yeah.
Let's double click there for a second because that's one of the things that I think was most, yeah, I think a good documentary for me is something that maybe surprises you as it goes along.
Mm,
And one of the first really good surprises for me watching this was that it was not her face, was not her voice. You're using a fake name, which makes sense. You're using deepfake technology to hide her image while she's being filmed. So there's kind of like a meta commentary level there of you don't actually even know who you're watching.
mm,
And I thought that was brilliant because, like you have this opportunity to basically see the technology live as you're watching this movie. And it just kind of fucks with your mind, right? Because you're like, holy shit, like she is speaking on Zoom or whatever you use, whatever technology you use to film these discussions. And you can't tell. There's no digital like glitching or like it's just a clean image of somebody who looks like a wholesome Midwestern like woman.
yeah, I mean exactly. And it's so great. I mean, I think it was useful for a number of reasons. I mean, one, I think the technology is just so perfect for documentary and video journalism and really should be adopted. Because not just does it sort of conceal the face, but it conceals the face, but also really translates the emotional truth of the footage that you're watching. So, if you typically before deepfake technology was out, you would sort of silhouette someone and you're actually just, eliminating or sort of subtracting details from this image. Whereas
Oh, I see what you're saying.
but with deepfake technology, the the face that you're seeing is not actually the face of the subject.
Right.
It's the face of a woman who sort of gave her face to protect our subject. But what's so great about deepfake technology is that it's not just sort of concealing everything about the face underneath. All it is doing is sort of translating the emotional expression onto another's facial features. So like every time you see Taylor smile in the movie, every time you see her raise an eyebrow, that is exactly how she raised the eyebrow, how she smiled
Mm,
in the original footage. The exact geometry of it is just translated onto these different facial features. So you are concealing someone's identity, but you're still managing to translate, to communicate, to convey their emotional experience.
yeah.
And so it's perfect for documentary because ultimately it is so boring to look at a silhouetted face for 90 minutes. It just doesn't work. And so before this technology, there were so many important stories that needed to be told and couldn't be told because there was no way of ensuring the sort of the safety of the subject. And so now vulnerable subjects are kind of being given a voice by deepfake technology. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, right? Think about how many political activists would have loved to speak out throughout history,
Mm.
right? And the best they could do was, like you said, a completely silhouetted face and a voice that was like, and then I wanted to, and like there was just, but it, like you, to your point, there was no emotional connection. Like you might have been interested in the story, but this is taking it to another level of saying, this is sort of a facsimile of exactly how that person is and who she is. It's just a different image to protect her, which is amazing.
Totally.
Um,
And some documentary purists are against it because it is a sort of manipulated image. And I get that, but I think that once you sort of really understand the technology at hand, and understand that the technology is doing nothing but changing the details of someone's sort of facial features,
yeah,
and it is a sort of almost indexical impression of the emotions in the original footage.
right.
They should be I hope will be more sort of supportive of it. 'Cause-
Send them my way if they have a problem with that, because you're protecting somebody like from harm. Like, what's the issue there?
Exactly, but people get very scared about new technologies, and that's another great thing about our use of deepfake technology in the film is that we this is a technology with a huge amount of potential for harm, but we didn't want to just fearmonger over the technological advancement. Like we don't see deepfake technology as intrinsically evil. It is just currently being used on a wide scale for bad. The technology has these applications where it can be sort of helpful and can sort of give people a voice, and so it's great that we were able to sort of incorporate it into the form of the film and try and sort of counter that. I think that urge to just sort of uh, run and hide from this emerging technology.
There's the entertainment industry is kind of built off of like two things, right? There's the public facing side, which is the actors and the people in the movies and the crews and the cast and everyone that people kind of get to know. And then there's like the sort of like contractual or litigious side. And I'm interested in this idea of like somebody who, let's say that they wanted to add, because in the movie there's one of that Tom Cruise meme, which is the big, I think the first time where the public sort of had an idea of how good deepfake technology was, right? Because there's that somebody on, I forget, Twitter or TikTok or somebody that would just make Tom Cruise videos, and I saw you put the clip of that in the movie. So let's just go with that example. Does Tom Cruise start getting royalties at some point if they want to have him in a movie where he doesn't even have to be on set, but he can just kind of like he'll just sign his likeness away and then he can get that check. There's some interesting implications for this.
No, totally. And that I think, that side of things I think does frighten me a little bit. Um, in a few different ways. I mean, one, I think that what it's going to do is that in that way it will sort of be taking away work from a lot of actors. I mean, why would you sort of cast this new upcoming person if you can get Tom Cruise basically for like a fraction of the cost?
Hmm.
It's also just such a cynical evidence is such a sort of cynical position on what cinema is that you would rather the face but without any of the sort of the all of the person
Right, right.
than an actor that can actually sort of perform and react to the situations, or organically. And that's what I will, I think that there is, although I do think it's sort of brilliant, the technology is brilliant and can appear totally seamless. Um, I do think that, and this is slightly countering what I said before, is that the emotion is sort of translated onto the face that you're seeing, but I think at like 90%,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I don't. It's not like there's any sort of deviation or change. It's just like it's like slightly reduced, and so if that was to be used in a film where the minutiae of someone's sort of facial performance is so important and it's slightly
Sure.
restricted by the limitations of the technology, the image that you're going to see is going to be far less sort of emotive than the original, and just bring about a new actor. Like Tom Cruise has had a great run, you know. Like let's if you can't afford him,
Give someone else a
let's
chance.
just cast someone a bit younger, someone who really needs a break. Um, and I really worry about it for like background actors, smaller actors as well, rather than the
Hmm.
stars, like what that means for them. Because, okay, goodbye central casting. If you can sort of pick from a database of people whose, faces have been scanned and uploaded to a
I see.
database. And so, yeah, I mean, there are some frightening implications for it there. I feel sympathetic to it when I feel like it's going to be like an independent filmmaker who wouldn't be able to sort of do a scene otherwise, or when it's a studio cutting costs, who know that their film is gonna be one of the few films that actually makes a serious profit of the year. I really resent these corners being cut.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a fairly good distinction, I guess, because
yeah,
there's a lot of discussion around AI in film in general.
yeah,
I didn't even realize what I was kind of opening up when I said
yeah,
that, but that's kind of a hot topic right now
yeah,
in
totally.
the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But for the purpose of protecting somebody who is being kind of brave and opening up about very personal, intimate experiences in her own life, it's
Mm,
a fantastic technology, and it's certainly used well here. Did you you said you have a background in that you kind of came across this through some research into 4chan. So
mm.
would you say your journey into becoming a filmmaker and your journey into kind of becoming in the entertainment industry was closely tied to your experience online? Like, are those two things tied together, or are they discrete things for you?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that, I still believe that we really haven't found a cinematic language which, adequately conveys how our lives are sort of divided between these two sort of experiences now, the sort of experience of the physical world around us and the experience of the sort of the online world. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's frightening when you look at your phone and it shows you your screen time, like how many hours you spent looking at your
Yeah.
screen each day. So this is a part of who we are. It's a part of how we experience. It's a part of how we feel. It is, and so we need to sort of find a way of rendering that in a way that's sort of cinematic and engaging. People were sort of tweeting about how of the sort of the great American directors who are currently making films, like their last like three. I'm definitely misquoting this. Last like none of their last three films were sort of set in the last 20 years, because of this sort of inherent belief that technology sort of kills drama. And so I
Huh.
think we need to sort of find. I wish I could get that up and quote it properly, but it is kind of extraordinary. I think, I mean, maybe it could be attributed to the fact that we are sort of a culture which feels very nostalgic for the aesthetics of a time past. But I get it, like if you have a mobile phone that can sort of provide you all the information available in the world in an instant, it's not going to be that hard to. I mean, you're not going to need the scene where you suddenly have to rush to. I don't know, Cairo to go to a specific library to sort of find like some information that is in a book that's only available there. And so I get why people are sort of averse to it. But we're gonna stop telling stories which sort of reflect represent the lives that we live in, the lives that we live today. And so yeah, I believe it's very important to sort of incorporate these forms into cinema and to sort of try and tell stories which make sense of the new existence that we have. Yeah.
I think I just want to pause there for a second and kind of like stay on that for a second because I think that's a very profound thing you just said. I'm trying to I'm trying to create like some language around it in my head to ask some questions around it because basically what you just said was what I heard you just say was that let's just take in the 80s, right? There's this discussion because I'm 42 now, so I kind of grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? And there's a joke about how it's not really a joke, but we kind of say it jokingly about how our parents had no idea where we were and we were just released out into the wild and like told to get home before dark, right? So within that, we kind of created our own drama. We kind of created our own laughter, we created our own pain, but it was all very like human to human. It was live. There was no internet. There was no digital kind of emotions or virtual emotions, right? It was all based off of things that happened to us or to people we know, right? And then when some of the chat technology came out, like AIM was a big one, AOL Instant Messenger was a big one. I grew up using ICQ, that was a big one. We could now share those experiences that we actually had on a virtual platform. So that was kind of the first generation of this. Now we're at a stage where we're actually creating new experiences online fully, not physically. And if I heard you correctly, because please stop me if I'm way off, but what I heard you say is that like film has not yet caught up to being able to kind of understand how to capture that. It's much more ephemeral. I don't know how to say that word,
Yeah.
ephemeral
Yeah.
now,
Emerald. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Where it's just like quick. It just happens and then it fleets, right? But it's real.
Yeah. No, like totally. And it's like it's a huge transformation to our like te temporal experience, but also I kind of feel like our spatial
Hmm.
experience. You know, before you were in a room with your family listening to the radio sort of together, but when you're scrolling on a phone, you're like 1 second you're half in your room, you're half on your sort of device, but on your device with every scroll, you'll suddenly be transported to some video which is telling you how amazing it is to visit Shanghai, and then there's a news clip from Iran, and so you're constantly like moving around like that, and sort of I
True.
don't know, it's the way that we experience the world and the extent of the world is so sort of transformed and really hard to sort of contain, in film because film sort of always has this like drive towards coherence, if the film feeling sort of cohesive. But the visual media that we see online is such a bricolage of random crap, which does not really work in together in any aesthetic sense apart from its sort of chaos. And so finding a way of sort of getting that chaos into film and making it feel coherent is a really, I think, an important thing for the next generation of filmmakers to do. Yeah.
So that's a perfect segue into something I wanted to ask you about. There's one filmmaker I know that's kind of tackling this now that I understand what you're saying. There's a filmmaker called Jane Schoenbrunn,
Yeah, yeah,
Schoenbrunn, I
yeah.
think, who's kind of tackling that. We're All Going to the
Yeah.
World's Fair certainly tries to capture the emotions of that experience.
Mm.
Are you going to move into narrative? Do you like documentaries? Do you like that format? Like where are you going?
Yeah, actually I was first and foremost a narrative filmmaker. Well, I when I was younger, I did like when I was playing around, I did narrative and fiction. My first sort of film that got any form of distribution, it was a short film, was a narrative film.
Okay.
And then I did a short documentary, then did another body. My next film that is just it's a short film, is just sort of finished post on, is a narrative film, and
Okay.
hopefully that will premiere uh this year or next year at a festival. And I'm writing a narrative feature film now. Just I'm about to hope I was planning to finish the second draft of it today before sending it to a producer. I think I'm going to need a bit more time tomorrow, and I've canceled a screening that I was meant to go to tomorrow to get that done.
Okay.
But yes, and that's what I'm trying to do is tell in that film, tell a story which does look at how the internet is sort of shaping our relationships, how
Yeah.
the degree of ambition or sort of like worldliness of teenagers. This one in particular is looks at um the unwavering celebration of stupid behavior on the internet. It's about a YouTube teen prankster who sort of collaborates with his addict father, and they sort of it goes on like a whirlwind of sort of bad behavior and internet micro celebrity. Yeah, I love Jane Schoenbrunn for what they're doing. I think I think I saw the TV Glow. I saw the TV Glow got me so excited for them as I'm sorry, We're All Going to the World Tour got me so excited for them as a filmmaker. I saw the TV Glow. It was fantastic. I loved it. I hope they return to the present day for their next movie. But it is still about how, media helps us to sort of understand ourselves and who we
Yeah.
are and how we find ourselves, how we project ourselves onto media, which I think is an important sort of thing to investigate, even if it is just with sort of television rather than the chaotic media that we encounter online. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Huh.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I could talk about that all day. I think what you've tapped into is something that I'm going to leave this conversation with kind of thinking about. But there was another thing I wanted to cover with you while I had you, because I thought one thing that another body did, which was very interesting to me, was it didn't necessarily shame people that enjoy pornography,
Yeah.
right? Because the film is about, let's call it the dark side of it, right? The dark side of non-consensual pornography. And I guess we haven't really defined that. I mean, maybe it's kind of implied in the name, but essentially non-consensual pornography, deepfake technology allows anybody to get, it's at 150 images, right, together, and essentially create a virtual um, like facsimile or a virtual kind of duplicate of a real person, and then put them on anybody they want to, their face on anybody they want to. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. I mean the technology sort of progressed and you can actually make deepfakes with it's even fewer photographs now. I mean, I think
Jeez.
if you can do it even with one, although there'll be a lower quality deepfake. But the phrase like non-consensual intimate imagery, I think that the people that work in the space try and avoid the word pornography in this context because pornography applies the consent. So
Ah.
for non-consensual intimate imagery, it does it incorporates like deep fake uh, videos which are sort of been created through deepfake or other tech-enabled sort of intimate imagery. But it's also, like nudes being shared or what's colloquially being called revenge porn. Again, the people
Mm-hmm.
in the space are trying to retire revenge porn as a phrase. Um, uh, and so yeah, it's basically any creation or distribution of, or actually threat to sort of create or distribute intimate imagery of someone who has not given their explicit consent for that image to be created, distributed. So yeah, and so it's deepfake technology is just the sort of the newest way that this, I mean, well, it's not even the newest anymore. This now can be done with the new AI image generation technologies. It's the second newest way that you can create non-consensual intimate imagery. And a long line of oh, there's like a long storied history to non-consensual intimate imagery, which is just being exacerbated by the internet and sort of these new technologies which are emerging.
I remember when I first discovered kind of online porn, um, online intimate imagery, however I remember it was essentially what's it called? Photoshop. So
Mm,
it was bad, but it was obvious. Like there was no, first of all, there was no video. It was just a still image. And second of all, it was like very obviously a fake,
yeah.
right? But I remember seeing that even in the 90s, like kind of the late 90s as being around and being like a thing. It was like if there was a random celebrity that you wanted to see, they're most likely not any images that they put themselves up, but it was like available just and it was obviously fake, but there seemed to be a huge market for it even then. So it's interesting. I don't know that there's necessarily like an answer here, but it is interesting to me that as long as there's been kind of online intimate imagery that's shared, there has been a desire for, I'm assuming mostly men, but just there's been a desire for people to like spy or like kind of get access to images and videos of people that wouldn't otherwise do it, which I think isn't. I've never thought about it until I saw this film, but like I think that's always kind of been there in some way, which is disturbing when you really think about it.
No, totally. Yeah. And I think that that sort of desire has always been there, particularly sort of with celebrities. I don't know so much the
Hmm.
history of how this sort of technology like this has been sort of used to sort of target peers, people in your own sort of milieu. But with sort of celebrities, it's just I think it's an interesting one with celebrities because I do think that having spent so much time researching the communities that make deep fakes, and I'm sure this it's something similar which goes back to the sort of the websites that you're referring to is that with celebrities, I don't think there's any sort of consideration for potential harm being done. You know, our
Hmm.
culture sort of has people who are in the public eye, we feel like we have a sort of like ownership over them. They're like more than human, and by being more than human, they're sort of so beyond feeling the effects of any of our
Yeah,
actions. And so it's like and so there's feels like there's this like right to take their image and use it in whatever way they want. And I will say that I think that I in all of this, I kind of fell into not quite that delusion, but I felt that like, or maybe how should I phrase this? I before when we first started reaching this, before we'd sort of interacted with celebrities who sort of, you know, being targeted on a huge scale by technologies like deepfake technology, my kind of assumption was that, you know, they're in the public eye, they're going to have a very thick skin. And they do have a thick skin. They have a much thicker skin than sort of, you know, your average person who this sort of like happens to. But they're also incredibly traumatized by it. They feel like threatened by it. They don't feel safe when they know that there are sort of swathes of men who are out there
mm,
creating these sort of like fantasy scenarios
mm,
where they're being engaged in sort of sex acts without their consent. They like, what happens if that person who's been sort of watching these every night for the last 3 years encounters them in public? Like, does that create some like rupture in their mind where they
mm,
feel like they can act on it? And so, you know, and not even just with the fear, just like knowing that your identity is sort of being stolen and used in this way and inserted into these, you know, sometimes horrific sort of situations is
right.
psychologically scarring, even for women in the public eye. And so, you know, um, and I think we forget that. I think we forget that celebrities are people too. People that when they encounter sort of, you know, this shocking material, when they encounter their face, engage in sex acts that they've never sort of consented to, that has a really scarring effect. Yeah.
That's what a fascinating discussion. I'm really interested in the way this is going. I mean, there are, each generation I think has to kind of come to terms with the fact that women are awfully the targets of this, right? I mean, are some men the targets of this kind of behavior? Sure, right? And like they're equally victims, and if that traumatizes them, they should be heard and all those kind of things. Like of course. But I'm sure the vast majority of this is targeted towards women, right? Like, I mean, it must be like a staggering majority.
Yeah, I think it's over 99%. I mean, I
Yeah,
must say that that's from some research body who like looked into it. I think in our time researching, I don't know how many sort of thumbnails of deepfakes I've sort of seen over the process of making this film. I mean, it would be in the tens of thousands. And I think I can maybe remember one or two of men sort of men in the public eye who've been targeted by this. One is the only one that one I was Donald Trump. I'm presuming was not motivated by sexual fantasy. I meant more sort of like create like a meme or humiliate.
yeah,
Not saying that
right.
that's okay. And so it's just like there is a huge disparity here. It's a crime which is overwhelmingly sort of perpetrated by men and overwhelmingly targeting women.
Right.
Because sex just isn't used to sort of shame men in the same way.
No.
We speak to a lot of people that are like, oh, why don't they just put him in a sort of deep fake as well? It's like, because frankly, you know, like we live in a culture where men engaging in sort of sexual situations are sort of celebrated. It's like there's a bravado attached to it. The
100%.
same situation with women is uh completely sort of flipped. There's shame associated with it.
Right.
Uh Women are, you know, we live in a culture where rape is incredibly prevalent. Women are being sexually harassed constantly. There's a sort of a huge sort of feeling of um insecurity when it comes to sort of the idea of sex with women because of the culture that we're like living in. Men don't fear that. I mean, of course,
Right.
men are sexually assaulted, but it's not something. It's not doesn't happen sort of. It's not so common. Men haven't gone through, aren't constantly going through these sort of experiences, so it's
Right.
not on the forefront of their minds. And so I think this combination of sort of threat and shame associated sort of with sex means that this is a a particularly sort of scarring experience for women, but also a sort of a particularly useful or effective weapon for men who are trying to target women in this way. Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Mm,
It's like technology is enabling this desire that's kind of always been there, or the behavior that's always been there. I don't know about desire, but there have been some ways where, women have been targeted and kind of made victims of sexual harassment of some kind or another. And this is now enabling it to happen at scale. Because there's some stats at the end of the movie which are wild in terms of how big of a problem this is.
mm,
But anyways, yeah.
mm,
I don't know if there's like a natural place to go with that other than just to bring awareness to it. I mean, the internet's an interesting place because of VPNs and anonymity, which certainly serves a purpose. There's a lot of communities on Reddit where people will open up an anonymous account and ask questions about like are their parents abusing them or something, and everyone's like, yeah, get the hell out of there.
mm.
And like that's great, right? So anonymity serves its purpose, but it also has, like we've been talking about, right? It has this dark side where you can't even be tracked now, where it's very difficult to be tracked.
Yeah, totally. And I always, particularly with Sophie, but with so many people that we worked with, we've discussed sort of potential solutions to this. And I don't know what Sophie's position is now, but there was a while where she really wanted to sort of like advocate for um, changing the sort of the architecture of the internet so it was very difficult to sort of operate anonymously on there. And beyond, I think, precluding or sort of restricting people to use the internet. And an amazing example that you've just sort of provided. That's a fantastic way that someone can feel sort of safe to sort of reach out to people and seek help when they otherwise wouldn't be. But the other thing is if, we actually just, if it was impossible to be anonymous on the internet, we're handing so much power to states or corporations to sort of surveil.
Right,
And
right, right,
I
right,
feel very uncomfortable about sort of enabling that degree of surveillance. Now we might sort of feel comfortable with our sort of our government, but ultimately
yeah,
who knows? I don't. I think I think it's sort of invasion of privacy to ensure that you have to sort of be tracked and have a fingerprint on everything that you do online. And so I don't know if I want to sort of strengthen that sort of apparatus for surveillance, which is already so powerful. Uh,
right,
so it's a really tricky one. But yeah, I agree that anonymity really emboldens people to act in shitty ways because they're acting without consequence or
right,
without assume sort of with the assumption of there being no consequences.
right,
And I do think that fear of consequences makes people better people on the whole. I don't mean like I'm advocating for sort of incarceration, but even social consequences.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
and so once all of that sort of fear is totally eliminated, people are kind of like really unleashed to
Hmm.
sort of act out their like worst sort of impulses. And
Well,
that's see, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know how much you know about what's going on in Texas right now, but if you want to go onto an adult website in Texas, you have to upload a copy of your driver's license to prove you're 18. But like
Um,
that's insane.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
insane. You have like an actual picture and like full record of everything about you associated with your search history. Like obviously that's not okay.
No,
Right?
yeah,
Like,
I don't think that's okay. Like, I mean, if these like companies are sort of being well regulated by in a trustworthy external
uh-huh.
body, and
Uh-huh.
they have watertight security, that would be almost okay. But
Mhm.
I still don't even think then. But knowing that these companies are so regularly hacked, and it's almost for certain that database of sort of names is going to someday be taken sort of by hackers, and
Of
people can see
course.
that information published or people extorted basically to
Yeah.
um, is just terrible. That's just so stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Well, there's a whole other conversation here which I'm not ready for, which is around the role that things like Silk Road and kind of the dark web play and all this. But I'm honestly not even qualified to ask a lot of questions around that. I just think it's an interesting topic that I might dig into after this conversation because I think another body plus hearing the intelligence that you bring to the conversation makes this a topic that I'm all of a sudden pretty interested in. I mean, I think like you know, there's a broader discussion other than just intimate imagery around like what is kind of the role of the internet now that we have the ability to access anything, create anything, post anything, right? I mean, like and you mentioned the election, 2020 election, most of the content coming out pro-Trump, they tied to like 20 people in Russia. I forget what it was. It was some crazy statistic that all these Facebook groups and all these like support online, some of it was authentic, but like the big majority of it was created by just random farms in Russia that were creating all this. And that's the world we live in now, right? So like how do we kind of adapt to that? And I think movies have always played an interesting role in highlighting changing like culture and changing society. So I think you're going to be a very important voice in that uh, as the culture grows and changes.
Well, I mean, I hope there are people smarter than me speaking louder than me who deal with this because there's a huge issue and it's evolving at such a sort of like rapid pace that we need like so many people sort of thinking this through. And what I really do think we need corporations who are um behind so much of these technological developments to have ethical sort of oversight and ensure that they're not just sort of seeking profit for their shareholders
You
because
know,
the corners are cut. Nothing is um you have so many things like now with OpenAI where the
right?
whole like, ethics committee is sort of quit over in the last like month, and now they're sort of after Sam Altman came back. I mean, that's just sort of terrifying to me because not that I think that AI has such huge amount of potential for good and it can really improve our lives. But if you have a company which is sort of so beholden to its profit margins, so much so that there's been a revolt by its like ethics board. Uh, who is going to be incredibly influential in the way that sort of technology does sort of shape the way we
Right.
live in the years to come. I'm nervous. I'm very nervous about that. And so I do think that we all need to slow down. Technology doesn't need to advance at this sort of the expense of safety checks. And so yeah.
You talk about social consequences. I will say there's an interesting example. There's a company, I think I can name them. It's all public information. They're called Rite Aid. It's a pharmacy here in the US, and they just got slapped with a really interesting penalty.
Mm,
So they are no longer, for 5 years, they're not allowed to use AI and the organization for customer-facing technology because they essentially tuned the algorithm to be racist. Now, were they like, are they all racist at the top? I mean, probably not. Like it's just a massive company with a bunch of people, right? Like
mm,
everyone in the company is probably not racist, but they were targeting like black women with a certain kind of coupon. And you just can't do that, right? Like you just can't like and they got caught and it was beyond a shadow of a doubt and they have 5 year ban from the technology. So that's going to hurt their ability to personalize coupons for 5 years, which will hurt their sales. So hopefully there's some enough of that where organizations give more power to the ethics boards, internal ethics
mm.
governance boards, right?
Yeah, totally. I agree with that. And we also need to ensure that the sort of the people, the lawmakers, people who are legislating over these companies really understand the technologies at hand. I mean, I think it was a
Right.
pretty dismal showing in the like meta depositions where the people and asking the questions knew demonstrated how little they knew
Oh
about
my gosh, it's wild.
how these companies worked. It's like, how are you in charge of regulating uh,
Yeah.
uh, big corporations like Meta when your understanding of it is so facile. And so we need to ensure that the people responsible for reining in these companies really do have an in-depth and awareness of how they operate and what the sort of the implications of the technology. Yeah.
I don't mean to make light of it because the point you bring up is very serious.
Mm.
But I was loving the comments in some of those videos.
Yeah.
It's like if you have to call your grandson to reset your router, you probably shouldn't be deciding, the future of Meta.
Yeah.
Um, anyways, okay. So man, we've covered a lot. This is all stemming from the documentary that you made. You co-directed. And I think, there are a few documentaries every once in a while, like I said, that come out that are just very exciting to me. And so I was extremely excited to get to speak to you and to highlight your views. I think your intelligence really comes through. I think your social kind of your interest in social justice and doing this the right way really shines. You seem to be kind of an activist at heart, which I love personally, so I'm just biased there. That was certainly a part of my younger years. As and I want people to go see this outside of going to Vinegar Syndrome and buying the Utopia Blu-ray of this. What are the other ways that people can see your film legally?
Is most of your audience in the US?
Actually, surprisingly global. We have, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, in the US right now, we are available to rent on Apple and Amazon, and you can stream it on Ovid.
Okay.
In the UK, we're on BBC iPlayer,
Great.
and we're on various other sort of like broadcasters or streamers in other countries around the world. I know we were broadcast by CBC Gem in Canada, but I don't know if they have if we're on their streaming platform. I don't know if they have a streaming platform actually. But if they do, and you're Canadian and you're aware of that, then go look us up there because we'll probably be
Uh-huh.
on that. Yeah.
Okay. And if people want to engage with you in some form of discourse about this, where are you most commonly online?
Yeah, so I'll check my Instagram message requests, and so my handle is URGHREUB, like Rube. So you can find me there. If you want to, if well, another thing I think it's really important to say is like if you or someone you know has experienced deepfake abuse and you want to reach out, you can either reach out to me or you can reach out to our organization, My Image, My Choice. You can find us on Instagram or on our website, and send us a message, and we can um, help sort of connect you to people that might be able to sort of assist you. We don't have a totally global awareness. We're more aware of routes for help in the United States, but we also are trying to do is sort of create a community of survivors. To can sort of share experiences and help each other. You
Great.
can speak out like anonymously or using your identity. And we have a kind of platform or page on this new platform called Story Circle, where survivors sort of can share their story and sort of discuss with each other. I think it's a very sort of cathartic
Yeah.
experience for the people who are getting involved. So yeah, get in contact. Mm.
Beautiful. Well, is there anything that I forgot to ask you? I think calling out My Image, My Choice was fantastic. I meant to do that and missed it, so I'm glad you did. That's very important. Anything else that I missed or you want to call out? Actually, even though I asked you the question if there's anything else, one more thing comes to mind as I think back about the conversation. We started to broach this topic of kind of the film's view or stance or not stance against pornography in general. And I think for me personally, watching the movie, it's like a non-issue because to me it's very clearly a movie about non-sensual, non-consensual, intimate imagery, I guess is a term I learned today. But I would just love to hear from you as well. Like, is that, how is that in your eyes as the director of this picture? Like, what's kind of does the film talk about pornography outside of the non-consensual part?
Yeah, it's a really important question because I think people need to sort of distinguish between what we now call non-consensual intimate imagery and consensual pornography. We are not anti-pornography. Taylor is not anti-pornography. The film is not anti-pornography. We really sort of celebrate the women's agency to engage in sex work and sort of to profit from that and to embrace their like body and their sexuality and to make a sort of career out of it. that and for sort of men to engage in that as long as it's consensual sort of pornography. I'm very I the blurring of those lines makes it very sort of difficult because um men then won't sort of distinguish between non-consensual intimate imagery and pornography and what they sort of engage in. And I do think that the sort of proliferation of sort of pornography might encourage men to engage in
Mm,
non-consensual imagery and the creation or sharing of it. But that doesn't mean that the solution to that is not sort of, an attack against pornography and just trying to sort of restrict the sort of the creation and sharing of consensual pornography. Um, we actually, for a while I do think with deepfakes, what's so often is talked about is the person whose sort of face is depicted in it, but we don't really talk about the sex worker, the adult performer whose body is in these videos, has been stolen, and whose body is sort of being mutated with another person's face, a person they have no connection to. We actually wanted to try and include the story of the woman whose body was depicted in the non-consensual intimate imagery, the deepfakes of Taylor. But ultimately, we kind of decided that it would be very difficult to fit into the film in the way that the story had unfolded.
okay.
Pursuing that, but it's sometimes I stay up at night and wonder and regret that and wish we had because I do really think it's important to distinguish between um, the work to sort of improve the conditions for women online who feel safe from having their images shared without their consent, and to ensure that sort of sex workers feel safe to sort of continue with their work, free from harassment. And free from sort of like very like punishing legislation, which will make it like harder for them to have a lucrative sort of
Yeah.
career from their work. And so, yeah,
I
um,
think the
yeah.
best documentaries tend to add nuance to a discussion, and I think that's my takeaway from this conversation with you, is you're not necessarily taking a stand on anything outside of what's very clearly in the movie is wrong.
Mm,
However, you're trying to bring a more intelligent discourse and kind of nuance to this discussion around online intimate imagery, if we just keep that as like an umbrella,
mm,
and trying to bring some responsibility and ethics to it, because it's not just a funny thing to have like a somebody you went to high school with to go scour her Facebook picture and get a deepfake video of her. Like that's not funny. Like it actually has implications, and in this movie, some of the professional implications are brought up as a woman's trying to break into tech, which is already male dominated, and like there's all these layers to it.
mm.
So I think that's my kind of takeaway from this is you are increasing the intelligence in the conversation, and hopefully people, I think the kind of people that would find this doc would hopefully get that as well. I can imagine sometimes that's not true. The comment sections can be brutal sometimes, but like I hope that anybody who kind of would be listening to our show or
Mm,
discover this documentary somehow would understand the nuance there and get it. And I just thank you for making it. I mean, this is your baby, right? You kind of had this idea and you saw it through and it toured, and now I get to have it on my shelf and I get to talk to you. So I just appreciate you doing this because this is the exciting thing about cinema for me, is whether it's through narrative or through docs to be able to um, like go into places where we wouldn't otherwise get to spend an hour and a half and really kind of dig deep and go into a topic and come away better for it. So
oh. Well, thank you so much, Chris. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, really. Um, yeah, and thank you for buying the physical copy. I love the people that physically own our film. We're very grateful to Vinegar Syndrome for creating and selling sort of a lot of these Blu-rays. So
oh yeah,
yeah,
of course.
yeah.
All right, well, I'll see you online, and thanks so much for making time.
All right, see you, Chris.